what our team, both the director, myself, our legislative director, are hearing from the members of the legislature who are, advocates of energy, advocates of equity, some overlap between that group. So what we'll get is a series of packages that incorporate as many of the ideas as we can harvest from this process and incorporate into the language that we put forward to create these compelling funding requests. And then a combination of perspectives from other stakeholders, whether they're legislative folks or folks in the governor's office. There may be some different framing that pops up between now and the submissions on September 14th, just based on the best thinking that we have for what we anticipate legislative session might look like and what might resonate with folks. Then once we get into session, what we'll be able to do is talk about the work that we've already done. We'll talk about the size and scale of the requests that we have. And then we'll be able to talk about the themes that have emerged and have been codified in this document as a way to engage stakeholders in understanding that this is not just commerce in a bubble thinking what's best for achieving clean energy goals of the state, but that this is some of the best thinking from top institutions around the state that have contributed to the direction that we are now heading. And so this really provides a supportive framework for us to talk about where the Clean Energy Fund should go. And we'll be having lots of conversations, probably over Zoom, with legislators, both leading up to the January session and then most likely during session as well. So thank you so much for all the time and energy that this entire team has put together to help create an environment where there's obvious support both for the work that we've already done and for some innovative directions that we want to go. And to the extent that it makes sense, to draw you and your institutions into conversations in support of the Clean Energy Fund. I can see that being a likely outcome of this work. So with that, I'll just pause, have a sip of coffee, and see what specific questions Kate, you or the committee have got for me.
We're not hearing any, and I think that covered what I was hoping we could do to kind of set the context for this. So I think next what I was thinking we could do is just go over the emerging themes document. Not the document itself, but just go over the high level topics that we've identified as some of these emerging ideas and just talk about them. We can describe to you why they're on the list. There's quite a bit of supporting information in that emerging themes document that you have access to. I don't know, Alana, if you want to pull up that PowerPoint, but
yep, I'll do that now.
Okay, but this is not a PowerPoint presentation by any means. I strongly encourage committee members to ask questions, just share your reactions to these ideas, and then we'll go into breakout sessions soon after this, and you'll be able to talk a little more detail about what you're seeing here and other ideas that you feel like we've missed or that we've characterized in a way that you think that there might be a better way to talk about it. So Alana, if you go to that first slide and so these are the programmatic recommendations that we identified in that document, and that kind of just rose to the top as we were having these various stakeholder sessions and as we've had discussions with you. So consistently, it came out that we should be using the state energy strategy and, referring to that process just as we think about where to invest CEF funds. And I think some of you all brought that up in our last ECPEC meeting as well. So then we have the clean, equitable transportation idea, which Michael just referred to, and which is a program we already have and that we've launched that this committee has talked about with us in the context of particularly of the equity work that's going on and the infusion of equity principles that's been put into that grant, the grant process that is ongoing right now. But there's much more we can do with regard to transportation, and there's quite a number of equity issues that have surfaced. But the state energy, I'll just note that the state energy strategy particularly is going to focus on transportation issues. It's one area where we can do a lot to decarbonize as we attempt to reach our goals both for 2030 and 2050. So this is called out as a particular place where investment might be needed. Please interrupt if you have questions or thoughts. And Alana, I can't see chat, so I'm not looking for them. So if you see any, let me know. The CEF lending program that we currently have, as you know, one of the deep dive stakeholder sessions that we did was in this area. Jennifer has talked about it quite a bit. We've definitely got some new ideas for how we could either expand that program or transform it into something that can continue to support projects out in the community, at the community level. In addition, just leverage some of the resources that we need out in the field as we make our energy transitions. So playing to Washington's existing strengths has to do with kind of just making sure we're conscious of and focusing on and aware of the all the benefits we already have in our state and making sure we're building on them from a technology standpoint, from an innovation standpoint, and from an economic standpoint. And Brian, I don't know if you want to add anything to that one.
Yeah, I'm good. Let's just.
Okay. All right, and then the fifth kind of programmatic area that we definitely heard as a running theme was the need to invest in our public infrastructure, our energy infrastructure in particular, and that could include infrastructure in the way of public buildings, in the way of transmission, in the way of our electric vehicle infrastructure. There's a number of different ways that infrastructure kind of line item can be interpreted, but it was definitely a running theme that there was needs in that area, and that one way we should be thinking about using the Clean Energy Fund is to build that out. So then the next slide, Alana, has a summary of this kind of more structural recommendations and that about the CEF program, how it's set up, how it's administered, and this really, for the most part, crosses over the different grant programs. And it actually surprised us how much talk there was about just challenges that are posed by the current system we have of, restrictions from the capital budget, just other restrictions that are have been placed on the grant programs that are administered under the Clean Energy Fund. And so a big part of the focus of the emerging ideas includes these structural recommendations. I'll just run through them really quickly. There was a desire to encourage collaboration, leverage partners so that you can bring more people to the table, and somehow, particularly this is a way of encouraging smaller communities, businesses, utilities to be able to participate in the program by kind of making, leveraging more group efforts in terms of access to CEF funds and CEF programs. The next bullet item was the equity and just environmental justice lens. And I think you all have heard about that a lot. It was definitely a running theme that we heard in the stakeholder sessions, and trying to replicate what we've done with the electrification of transportation system program, for example, and also what we're now doing with the solar deployment program. So thinking about trying to build out that that lens on what we're doing, and having legislative support to do that. So the next bullet item kind of relates, but it's more foundational, which is to ensure that we're reaching out to communities and understanding what they need and want, and as we craft these programs and as we implement them. And so that's seen as a different kind of item and a different way of tackling this problem, but something that we're being encouraged to do just as part of making sure that we're not deciding for communities what they need, that they're being empowered to make their own decisions. And we know that as part of solving our energy problems into the future and meeting our climate goals, that community-based resiliency and solutions are going to be part of that. And so this is why this rose to the level of coming onto this list. So we heard a lot about the need for better, more outreach, technical assistant education. Again, this is a way to be able to reach out to smaller organizations and businesses and communities, but we need that support, and we're being encouraged to provide that support as part of the Clean Energy Fund programs delivery. So we also heard a lot about the funding stream and the conditions that are on appropriations. Again, as we've discussed here, some of that is within our control, some of it's not, but it was definitely a theme that arose, and one that rose to the level of needing to be flagged for you all. And then finally, the idea of whether or not we need some kind of more coordinated program structure that for the delivery of the CEF programs, both in terms of individual grant application processes, but also in terms of strategic planning for the actual grant programs. So that's the last item, and we consistently heard recommendations for example, for the Resource Conservation Office, which delivers a lot of grant programs in Washington, and then for the Oregon Trust Program, that is one other model for kind of delivering these kind of services. So there's much more in the document that you were sent, to support these ideas, but I'm very interested in hearing from you all. Is there any immediate reaction or conversation coming out of that? And Alana, we can just go back to full screen now. Reactions? No, Scott has none.
We're going to dig into them in the breakout session. Start the conversation now.
All right, well, so I guess then we will go into our breakout sessions, and maybe the facilitators can prompt more conversation. Alana, you're more in control of who's going into which group. Do we have critical mass for both? I think
Yeah, we do. We have a good side. It looks like Tom might be having some connection issues. He's kind of on and off. But yeah, they're ready to go. And a message will go around and let you know when the breakout sessions are ending as well. It can be a little disorienting when you get kicked out of one. So just as a heads up.
Okay, well, let's stay in touch and figure out when we need to get out of the breakout sessions. It looks like Dan has joined us.
I apologize for the late start.
We're glad to have you. It's funny because Joel had to cut out at 1:30, so we get you instead. And
A
that's
poor
wonderful.
substitute. Poor
No.
substitute, but we'll take it.
But what we're going to do, Dan, and we're just going to go ahead and go into our breakout sessions and try and kind of talk a little more about what your reactions are to these ideas. So Alana's going to make that magic happen, and we will see you there.
Hey, Michael, I haven't assigned you to a group yet. Do you have a preference for which one you would like to join? One of them is a lot bigger than the other at the moment.
You can play. Well, first preference is place me for balancing, but if you don't, that doesn't matter. You can place me where Bob is.
Okay, great. All right, you will get an invite.
Thanks.
No worries. Hi, Tom. I am going to assign you to a breakout group.
Okay.
They've just gone into them.
I have very weak internet, so I don't know how well I'll be able to do, though.
Okay, no problem. I can
Okay.
put you back in as many times as we need.
Okay, thanks.
We also discussed ideas of different projects. At the very end, we talked about circular economies and recycling and biodigesters as potential opportunity. We talked about in the past, I gave the example of one obstacle that I faced when I partnered with, CW partnered with the PUD here in the city of Ellensburg, and when we submitted the grant, and Scott provided more context of what was the challenge at that time, the way in which the grant was written, using infrastructure that was already in place, and we had those conversations. But I don't know, Scott, what do you think?
Well, part of it was about the program is defined around capital assets, and there's a fairly large, depending upon how much we want. We talked a little bit about getting some metrics and defined outcomes and goals and measures, and that increases what is already a bit of an administrative burden. And so right now, there's a bit of just a systemic bias against the smaller participants. Now, that's been seen with the utilities. It's also with the schools. And you just need a larger organization in order to do the lift and maintain the workload that we'd like to see, right? So we did talk a little bit towards the end about strategically framing up certain types of projects or requiring these larger collaborations between multiple types of partners, which is very hard to create at the front end. But if they get to the point where they've created the partnership and they're able to put a project in for application, they're more likely to be successful. And that way you can also broaden that reach to smaller entities who are partnering with larger entities, and more diversity in who's involved in terms of the types of entities. And I think that those were, exploring the fact that everything that we threw out has got trade-offs as well.
So Brian, that was kind of on these, we were kind of getting report out from your group. One question I have for you all is, did you talk at all about or reflect on the recommendation or the emerging themes and ideas document, and whether or not you felt like that captured some of these ideas that you're talking about? Because they certainly were running themes we heard throughout the stakeholder sessions.
I think they were on point. I didn't have anything else to add. I mentioned that I liked the focus on social justice and minorities and low-income communities. I think that's crucial in the rural areas, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, I was saying our group didn't have any. Go ahead, Tom.
Well, I was interested in why I wasn't seeing more about performance metrics or measures of success in all of this, and also why I wasn't seeing more demand response type projects. And we had a discussion about it. I think there's a lot of reasons why we don't see a lot of those things, but I think at the same time the discussion indicated that there may be potential to see more of those things, and so. I think it's I'd like to see it discussed more and more thought given into it of how to overcome some of those hurdles. Thanks.
So on the performance metrics, just so I understand, are you talking about the actual delivery of the grant programs, or you're talking about for the CEF as a whole? I mean, for the individual applications, or?
Well, just in, starting with the presentations about what is accomplished, what we're doing with the programs and within the separate funds. There's a lot of talk about process and a description of how the money was spent or who gets money, but not a lot about what was accomplished. And a lot of times, if you're evaluating a program, it's good to look at what was accomplished from different types of projects. And if they were successful, try to do more of that. And if they weren't successful, try to do less of it. But I didn't get a sense that we're doing that kind of evaluation. And so I'm always interested in performance metrics. It's always a challenge. You know, we do it in higher education. We did it at the Power Council. But it's always, you know, it's always worth a little time to think in general, what are we trying to accomplish? Did we do it? And then be able to brag about it.
So I definitely think we can work that concept into the existing emerging themes and ideas, particularly with the kind of program structure and strategic planning item that's just happens to be the last one in the document, but definitely point taken. And we'll try and weave some more of that in there. All right, coming out of the other group, I don't know, we have, I think our members returned. It's surprising, I'm happy. So I don't know if Dan or Mike or Melanie or Angela, if you want to talk a little bit about what we talked about.
I think we voted Dan was our leader.
Or
Was
if you
my
want me to, because I was taking notes. Well,
Mike is unmuted. He unmuted first, so he's got the mic.
Oh, geez. I didn't take notes, so I guess I can. Let me see if I can go through. So I'll do a quick one, and then others should chime in, including you, Kate, because you took notes. So basically, we looked at the emerging ideas document for that, and sort of, you know, we start off our discussion really sort of looking into saying we don't really fundamentally disagree with any of these components to there. I think we had, you know, pretty large agreement about structuring the CEF around sort of the strategic goals of the state to help achieve those aspects. We were in large part agreement about focusing on clear strengths that that the state has in certain industry sectors for that, in those sorts of pieces. We had a fair bit of discussion with regard to the inclusion of broadening of other groups in this, smaller utilities and industries, other universities other than, you know, Kate said she's put the big universities in there, although P&L is in there and one of the universities, so big research entities, I guess, in there. But we talked a lot about that, used examples of how this was done with the JC Dream and a few of these other sorts of pieces for that. We also had a fair bit of discussion around the limitations of the capital budget in terms of accomplishing a lot of these goals, and especially around equity and inclusion aspects of things. A lot of those aspects that are really require operational costs in terms of doing that, and that it's oftentimes difficult from just a pure you know, capital budget sort of perspective of that. So of course we made a recommendation to try to expand out of the capital budget. We realize that's not even a thought this, you know, coming time, but I don't know that it's something we should, you know, sort of not sort of aspire to in maybe out years for that, because you know, this document isn't going to just inform 1 year's worth of activities along the line for that. So that certainly should be an aspirational goal. But then we also talked a fair bit about other existing programs, and this is, you know, became, you know, sort of Dan had a few ideas on this, and Jennifer sort of commented back on some of these areas about existing programs that might be useful in providing some operational funds that weren't strictly the Clean Energy Fund. And so how might these be capitalized and be expanded into different areas to sort of further the goals of the Clean Energy Fund along the way for that. So so I think in the to kind of a quick I know we had another discussion, sorry about this, that Jennifer sort of went around and how could this be used to spur investments on the Fed side of things too. So use this as seed, either as matching or other things to kind of position us for federal funds along the line for that. And one of the things that we noted was the large matching component in the early years of the CEF and around the stimulus funding and how these were done in concert with one another. Is there going to be something like that coming around again because of the economic crisis from the pandemic? And is there an opportunity to position ourselves to likewise take advantage of that scenario for that? So to kind of recap, I don't think any of us had any fundamental disagreements at all with the emerging ideas piece on that. And some of these other pieces I talked about were kind of nuances or additions that we sort of brought to the table on that. So Dan, since we did elect you chair, I don't know if you want to sort of comment on some of that, and maybe Kate's got better notes.
Here on Vashon Island, they elect a mayor every year, and it's usually a dog, a goat, or something else. So I guess I was elected the dog of that committee. But I will add a little bit. For instance, specifically, we talked about Career Connect Washington and trying to connect in the fact that the equity issue will have jobs, employment, opportunities, and Career Connect Washington has a new workforce development budget and probably could be mated in really sensible ways with capital dollars to push some of the equity, the combination of capital and training dollars. We have, when Mike mentions the idea that we focus on certain sectors we're good at, well, we have in the community colleges Center of Excellence in Information and Communication Technology at Bellevue College. We've got the clean energy one at Centralia, Center of Excellence at Centralia. We've got the Center of Excellence at Everett in aviation. We can go through and we can see that there are existing programs that could have training dollars coming in if there was coordination with the new operating budget that Career Connect Washington has and the potential capital budget here. The other thing I would add a layer to on what Mike said would be that I think in item 5 on the emerging or on the recommendations, the one that was public infrastructure, I think that at least some of the conversation was capturing the idea that research infrastructure can also be public infrastructure. It's not just charging stations. So when Mike talked about the JC Dream Award, that was capital dollars that went to Western for electron microscopy and stuff to bolster their innovation capacity as in research and things like that. And so public investment in infrastructure can have, it mostly lists charging and roads and stuff, but it can also support small and big institutions in that way. We did spend time on the equity issues, talking about, I think Mike had mentioned, I mean, there's the capital, operating dollars would help build capacity. That is the capacity building money, so that the small utilities, the community-based organizations and others can have technical support for their ideas rather than having to have a technical team already in-house to do things. I don't know, that
one other theme that that we kind of started the conversation off with, Dan, really was this idea of deployment versus innovation. And, while a lot of the text in the emerging ideas was really sort of about deployment and one sort of aligning with our strategic goals, especially if they're the more near-term goals, like the 2030 goals, which really are around the table when we're talking about these, large projects along this line of things. Really to meet some of these 2050 goals, we're going to need some sea changes and things, and that's going to take innovation, right? So this idea of maybe making sure that the document emphasizes the role of both deployment and fostering those as well, to get our near-term goals, but to not abandon the innovation side, so we're actually able to reach those 2050 longer-term goals along the line for that. And that was actually spurred off some of the discussion that we had going forward along the line for that. So Kate, I don't know if Dan and I missed things or not, or if we ticked most of your boxes.
Well, and given that we're mostly telling Melanie and Angela's ideas, maybe they
That's right.
have more.
That's why those are just the good ones.
Well said, gentlemen. I don't think I have much to add there.
One thing that we discussed was the transportation sector in particular, and how a number of the programmatic recommendations kind of touch on transportation. We're expecting the state energy strategy to have a big emphasis on the need to address the carbon in our transportation sector writ large, but light duty vehicles in particular. And so we talked a little bit about how there is a call out for catalyzing clean transportation, but that also really the public infrastructure and playing to Washington's existing strengths also touch on transportation, and it's kind of what
in particular.
Yeah, and that the aerospace work that Mike's already and many others are already doing, it might prove to be a useful model for other kind of build outs of programs that can begin to address the innovation and the deployment, both, I guess, that are needed in these other parts of the transportation world. So, does anybody from the other group have reactions to that, or to this, or I don't know. I guess kind of interested in the innovation versus deployment part, and if Joel or Tom or I'm not sure if Elvin's still with us. Yeah, he is.
Yeah, I'm here.
Well, Scott did a lot of nodding, so I think he agrees with everything.
Well, that and I'm falling asleep. No.
Okay.
I think it's attention, and we discussed this earlier on in the summer. It just that when you're looking at deployment, you really want something that's reasonably mature, or you're looking at small scale pilot projects to learn from. The innovation is pretty much wide open because you don't know what you're going to get, and you've got to allow a big filter there. And that's the tension when you've got a limited program. I guess my only added personal perspective is that let's be strategic about it. Let's go ahead and try. Don't get too focused, but still try to focus it down a little bit. And I really like what I heard from Dan about strategically lining up with other work that's going on, because the pilot projects, how do we really ensure that we learn something from them, and then that we share those lessons out to everyone else? That's administrative work. That's educational work. That's not really funded through your program.
I guess, Brian and Jennifer, do you have anything that you want to add to kind of this conversation and based on what you heard?
Who's Brian? I can. Well, I mean, what Scott was just talking about is an area we were hitting on a lot. One area that I already came up, Mike or Dan mentioned, but JC Dream came up in our discussions too as a good example. As we talked about, how should these teams be structured? Should it be large multiplayer teams with lots of different entities involved to kind of ensure or help make the chances of long-term success more possible? Or should we spread it all out and try to seed a lot of different smaller ideas that are less complicated, one person, one company teams? I think in general, we thought the complexity and upfront work required to get everybody on a team working together is worth it. So it's a lot of upfront. It's a lot of the big teams. They tend to work at different speeds. So a big corporate's got to work at a different speed than the academic on a team. But if you can work that kind of out up front, it's worth the pain to some extent, I think is where we got. But JC Dream was brought up as a good example of that. I think the other thing we talked about, I don't know if it's directly related to that, is just directing the funding much more specifically. If we want to see if we think we need more demand response projects to meet CETA goals, tell the utilities to give us their best demand response projects. That's just an example that we were talking about, but that was one area that I think was a possibility that would be very different than we've traditionally done it, where we have not been very directive with this money. So that's the other area that we talked about. I don't know if anybody has thoughts on that.
So I know CETA has up to, I guess, at least the 2030 goals, whatever, these innovation project options that ecology can decide that you're going to have offsets. Brian, your thoughts made me think, are there ways for us to be creative? Again, thinking about pulling different kinds of programs together, achieving CETA goals through these innovation projects with some CEF funds so that we can move farther faster, aligning them with, demand, elevating all of our demand. If you get a bunch of innovation projects around demand response that are coming from the utilities and their planning, do we try to make it more of a public benefit by pulling in some of the public dollars in ways that the state can learn and go faster because that's one of the innovation project strategies or something? I'm trying to pull in that dimension of CETA and wondering how that part might line up. Now, I know it's a different agency that's ultimately going to decide whether that proposal achieves the carbon offsets that the utility is not directly reducing through their activities. And so I don't know whether they're aligned or not. Any opinions from people that know CETA inside and out and what ecology is thinking?
So we don't have our CETA experts on the call. I don't know if anybody else from Commerce knows enough to address that. But we can explore it. I just don't know enough to answer your question, Dan, about how that's going to work. And
I don't have an answer. I think I think the state government suffers from the same thing sometimes maybe the federal government suffers from, where trying to align like a Department of Commerce and a DoD funding opportunity is pretty difficult. But I know we do. We have good communications with ecology, and I've been working like on some of this circular economy work that we've been doing over the last 2 years, where we are directly working under funding from ecology on that. So, but yeah, I don't know enough about the actual CETA, about that particular opportunity to do that.
No,
I
and
al-
similarly with UTC, I'll say, we work a good bit with them on the regulatory side and in CETA implementation. Go
I
ahead,
can-
Cartwright.
Oh, go.
Yes, Michael. I didn't want to call you out.
That's okay. You should. So I've worked on the energy transformation project compliance. Commerce has worked with Bill Drumheller and others at Ecology, and that's going to be a long game because I haven't checked in recently, but basically they're adopting rules to do more that enable deeper programmatic adoption, because it's really quite complex for the ETP to be implemented and enforceable and robust enough. Something that, and I've talked about this with Kate and others at Commerce, is I think there is, like, we should not dissuade utilities from overlapping what they're doing with CETA compliance and potential competitive grants. But for me, with my utility regulator hat on, ETPs are fundamentally a regulatory compliance mechanism. And so when the utilities who pursue them demonstrate that it is the, it's the cost-effective, reasonable approach compared to what they should be doing, which is investing in zero emission resources, demand side management technologies. And my concern is that I don't know why, I'm not convinced that a program like CEF should be funding what is ultimately a legally binding obligation by utilities. Now, that being said, I think there is room for, if a utility is looking at an ETP, for example, let's say it's an energy efficiency project that is not currently required by law, which is, CETA says you have to do that before that can be counted towards as an ETP. And if the utility is like, well, what if we incorporate equity elements and that no longer becomes cost effective or feasible? I think that's something that CEF could explore from an innovative perspective. And I name energy efficiency, but I think a lot more about it in a transportation perspective. But to me, there's actually a lot of concern about the state funding something that utility ratepayers should ultimately be doing. So it's very hard. We've talked a little bit about it with Ecology, and I would raise that with other, potential regulations on utilities or other entities that we can't envision right now. But we shouldn't be a piggy bank for a specific utility to accomplish what it's legally required to do.
Thank you, Michael. More than you know. Thank you.
That's a tricky area. I was thinking about, are there projects that would jumpstart innovation towards compliance for the HB 1257, the large building retrofit standard requirement that goes in effect after, I think, 5 or 6 years. And, it seems like it's kind of similar. You shouldn't subsidize something that's statutorily required, but at the same time, seeding innovation, even if it's innovation in deploying fairly known concepts like retro commissioning and retrofit concepts that have been applied elsewhere, and similar things in electrification on the CETA side, it seems like there ought to be some room or scope for that would be fair game.
And these are issues that are definitely being explored in the state energy strategy process, right? Because we know that our existing requirements even won't get us to our goals. So kind of trying to explore what we can do from a, regulatory standpoint, but also from an incentive standpoint to make some of this stuff move forward, the change we know we need to happen. And at the same time, to your point, Joel, is thinking about the equity issues and where change might happen, in one economic demographic, but it might not be as easy to achieve in other demographics or with other populations. And so thinking about how we can incentivize a more equal spread of the fixes that we really need across the whole state and across the whole economy. So, but yeah, it's interesting to think about. And incentives, of course, are a lot easier to get through politically than mandates, but they don't always work.
Yeah, I mean, I will say on that, because we talked a little bit about that, and I think what I've heard through this whole process from the subcommittees and the groups and whatnot is keep that focus on innovation. So yeah, we don't want to, as Michael was saying, we don't want to help them just meet their obligations they already have. I think if we are helping them meet it, we're encouraging to do that in a new, not just an off-the-shelf way to hit your targets, but you're somehow pushing the envelope, bringing something new to the conversation while you're meeting your goals. So that's kind of where we got to a little bit about how you balance those two things. And I do think, I mean, for instance, Joel, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, somebody, but I think the idea behind like the Clean Buildings Bill is that there was discussion that they may come back and provide incentives for that at a later time. Well, good luck getting it. Like if you don't get it right away, it can be hard to get. But I will say like how this works, and with CETA and Clean Buildings, you get a call, somebody who's interested in it. What are the incentives to come and do it? And there are no incentives necessarily, they're requirements. So then their next question is like, they try to hook the Clean Energy Fund up as that incentive. So I could get a Clean Energy Fund award to go do this. And that's kind of how, that's just a generalized thing that I hear a lot of how people go about it. Like they just assume there's probably money behind CETA. This is people calling from out of state often, but like looking for opportunities, but they assume there's some money behind CETA, like incentive wise, and there really isn't, and nor is there in Clean Buildings yet. It's really, you get to do it. But the Clean Energy Fund then comes the de facto, like in their mind, ways that they could get money to do what they're required to do. I see it a lot.
So one of the things that we talked about in our group towards the end, and I'm not sure we completely fleshed it out after we elected Dan as the chairman of that little group, was just how you all want to go about concluding this work and where we should go. And just to, and I apologize for repeating what our group already heard, but the plan here is to submit the report before December 31st to the legislature per the requirement of the budget, of the statute that we're working under. It's not a statute, it's a law. Well, it's a budget proviso, but so we will submit a report. The recommendations coming out of this committee are going to be part of that report. They'll be inserted into a package that is going to be a standard commerce report and that'll have, remember that background document that we had back in the day. So it'll have some information from that. It'll set up the committee, set up what we did, talk about the CEF historically, and then kind of lead into the recommendations. And then there'll probably be appendices, perhaps even those stakeholder session summaries that we sent to you all, just to kind of document the process we went through and what came out of that. So, and we'll package that up and So it'll go in under Commerce's name, but with the recommendations coming out of this committee. And so the emerging themes and ideas document that we sent and that we were working off of today is probably intended to be the guts of those recommendations, is intended to be. So we talked a little bit, but want to make sure we talk with the whole group about what next steps should be, what you need from us to kind of reach a point where you feel comfortable with us inserting recommendations into this report and putting your names on it. The charter that we kind of adopted at the very beginning doesn't require consensus or a vote or anything like that. Hopefully everybody can like more than just live with whatever the content is. Hopefully you're supportive of it. And if there are strong objections, I think we all want to hear about them to anything in there. But part of the reason that we were thinking for the September meeting was perhaps that we would clean up this document to respond to what we're hearing today, to the extent we heard it correctly, and then perhaps send it back out to you all for a scrub and for you to read through and submit us back your comments in however you want to do that. You can redline, strike out, and tell us we didn't use Oxford Commerce where we should have, or you can tell us we missed an idea that really should be in there or a nuance. So collect those back from you and then repackage it and then meet again for a shorter meeting in September and kind of bring it to a close. That's kind of what we were envisioning, and then we'll package it up and put it into a report and communicate with you. Thank you, Melanie, for participating today. It was great to have you.
Thanks for inviting me. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Okay. So that's kind of the process we were thinking of, but the real key question for you today is, do you feel like you have gotten the information you need to conclude this process along that kind of time frame, within that framework that I just described, or is there some other way you want to do this? Or do you need more information from us about any particular aspect of this?
I'm certainly happy to work off of your document, send comments in. The one thing that I don't know whether we can do it, I thought it made a lot of sense would be after we get sort of the recommendations, just have them listed 1 to 5 or 6 or however many you end up with, and have us just vote them up or down, because how they see them from 1 to 6 might matter how they're perceived. If we say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we can do that with poll everywhere really easily. It's just you have the 5 of them or 6 of them or whatever the recommendations, and we each just get to order them however we want, and you get the consent. It would be sort of a consensus ordering, but it wouldn't be a vote on yes, no on everything.
That sounds totally doable. I mean, even we could do it at the September meeting once we kind of have the language that we're comfortable with. We could, I mean, yeah, it's even a doodle poll option, but Elvin's been getting way too many doodle polls, so we maybe don't want to do it that way.
No, it's all right. I'm fine. Quick. I just don't remember what I answered when to whom. I agree with Dan about that approach, but I'm also more than happy to meet again if it's necessary.
Well, I think we would meet again if that's okay, just to walk through the document one last time, make sure. I don't know. I mean, you tell me if that, because, well, somehow we have to present to you the final version once we get your feedback. So I guess that we would use that forum to do that. So it sounds like there's not strong objection to that approach. Do any commerce people want to come in on that approach? Because we hadn't really talked about it. It was just something Dan came up with.
I second the chair's suggestion. I don't have a better or more efficient process, and I don't want to try to concoct one. So I think what Dan suggested would work and is efficient.
Makes sense to me. I mean, the only thing.
Go ahead, Brian.
Oh, the only thing I was going to add, but Michael's got it, just is that, as I mentioned, my other group, if there's something here we did miss or you feel passionate about that we need to talk more about one-on-one, or you want to send a big email about, please do that as well. It doesn't just have to be Oxford commas and things like that.
No.
But go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, so it just occurred to me, one of the things that we really never discussed, and I don't know if it's relevant or in the purview of this committee really to do that, is do we think the funds that have been allocated to the program are sufficient and adequate to meet the goals of the program? Especially if the program, is, if one of the recommendations of the program, which it currently is, and it's currently number one, and we realize it's not necessarily that ordered, but is to help achieve the energy strategy for the state. Is that something we should discuss at some point and make some recommendation on or not? Or that's just like, well, you can do that, but that's useless because they're going to appropriate what they're going to appropriate. So anyways, just throw that out there.
I think there is pretty much unanimous consent that we don't have enough money to operationalize the equity goals and the community kind of outreach and the technical assistance, and all of that. And we can't do it with capital funds.
Right, amount or color of money, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, exact budget amount. I mean, and so that is flagged in there and will likely, I assume, stay in there. But in terms of actual, go ahead, Jennifer.
No, finish your thought.
Oh, actual budget amounts is tricky, especially this year, right?
I do think, though, if we want more discussion on that, we could do that in the next meeting. But I do think calling that out would be helpful, because I'm literally just sitting here writing this request for, $100 million for the next biennium, and we know we're not going to get anywhere near that. But having this committee emphasize that the funding that this program's been getting over the years and the color of the funding hasn't been adequate, it needs to be, if we're especially going to align it with the state energy strategy, CETA goals, it needs to be in lockstep to do those things. Right. So I like that, at least a highlight or call out on the funding. I think would be appropriate. Funding level.
And Kate, I wasn't proposing that we actually put a hard, fast number in. It was more a comment on what we have had versus what is needed, sort of thing in terms of, qualitative assessment, I guess, rather than a quantitative sort of piece. Because, I don't know that we're we're really capable of assessing, you need 100 million versus 200 million versus 50 million. Well, maybe, that type of thing. So.
I don't think the state energy strategy is going to help us much there. I don't think it's going to contain that kind of granular information either. It's just going to say we need to invest in, I don't know, low carbon fuel technology or, that kind of thing.
But it seems as though that kind of recommendation along within the strategy, gives the ammunition to the policymakers, right, on the appropriations committee, saying they need more. We need to increase this number, or no, that number isn't needed, or so on and so forth. So it you know, it just serves up that sort of ability for those that have that proclivity to sort of use that as evidence, I guess, is what I would say. It just seems like our conversations certainly would agree with that part. So anyways, that's why I brought it up.
Good.
So I'm a little curious, because I don't really understand or remember, probably my memory, the final process here. This is going in as a legislative report. And what I'm seeing right now is a summary of what's wrong or missing. I won't say wrong, but what's missing from the current structure. Are you also going to include a recommendation for change, or is that part of their deliberation process?
So the recommendations aren't intended to be just a list of condemnation of the current program. It is intended to be more of a just a suggestions, I guess, on how the programs can and could be morphed in to adapt to the circumstances we're in right now, the goals we've identified, the experiences, you know, our history with the program, and how we might better implement it or set it up to be best implemented in the future. So if you feel like it's coming off as too negative, please, you know, point out those places and we can do that.
No, I think my thought right now is that we've identified a number of valid concerns, and it's going to feel like a big lift to address all of those. And potentially so much so that it just, we can't deal with this. So going back to what Dan had suggested earlier, if we prioritize those concerns, I think that'll make it more digestible and more approachable. But I was just wondering, because I wasn't real clear on what those next steps would be like.
And I think, you know, throughout the legislative session, Commerce is going to, and the governor's office and others are going to be engaging in the legislative process and trying to promote these, the budget asks that we have with regard to this program. And as Michael said, to be able to use the weight of this committee and the recommendations coming out of it and to cite those, to promote those much more specific asks, which hopefully will be change, is, you know, part of what we're hoping to get out of this. And as Mike points out, not just this budget cycle, but in future years as well. Because this work hasn't been done in the, you know, the CEF's been in place since 2013, and this kind of look hasn't happened before now.
I'll just add that from my perspective, I don't feel it's overly negative. I mean, I could see how each of these recommendations could even fit within the same framework, largely of electrification, of grid mod, so I would see ways that these recommendations wouldn't require massive change. It would just require some rule changes and thinking about things in there. I'm not saying that's where it would stop, but I don't think it would have to be perceived as overly negative. At least I haven't seen it. To me, it doesn't feel overly negative. It feels like some add-ons. I think the equity part is the most interesting new part, where it's not clear how to implement it within this framework, to my mind. And you know, so I do think that there are new elements. I'm not saying that at all, but to me, it didn't come off that negative.
And with regard to equity in particular, we do keep seeing these this legislative language that tells us to take into account equity issues as we implement our programs and craft our programs. I mean, it's in CETA, it's in the state energy strategy mandate, it's in it was in the CEF this past go round. And part of what we need to do is help educate the legislature about what that, I mean, it's really easy politically to pass, tell us to do that, but what it actually takes to operationalize that kind of language is, is pretty daunting. And to be able to start to educate and communicate about that is something that we've been thinking a lot about doing. And Jennifer in particular has been working on that.
I got to drop off here now. So thanks a lot for this. I thought it was a productive meeting today. Dan, thanks for your leadership. And look forward to the next meeting and seeing a draft.
All right, enjoy that trailer.
For everybody else, I'm in my camper. That's why it looks like a camper. And my we had to make a self-contained kind of last-minute trip to help family back on the East Coast. So we're back in Vermont. So anyways, so I fessed up in our group. So anyways, okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mike.
Thanks, everyone. I'm off too.
All right, I think the meeting is being concluded by its own weight.
Okay, I thought maybe me doing this might get an avalanche.
That's it. So, all right.
I'm happy to stay till the anointed hour, but
if not, I'm ready to go.
Okay. Well, you will be hearing from us. We will send back out a draft per our conversation and ask for your feedback and put timelines in there. And then if you haven't responded to the doodle poll, Alana will be in touch and we'll try and get a date in September for a quick meeting.
All right, thank you.
Thank you all so much for this today. This has been super helpful. Appreciate it very much.
Have a good evening.
All right. Okay.
thanks everybody. Have a great night.
Okay.
See you, everybody.